Okay. So, hi Neil, welcome to the podcast. And for viewers, I want to say that Neil is an international relations expert, especially focused on Middle East, and he regularly writes blogs on the news outlet Times of Israel. And I will share the link. You can go and read it. And welcome Neil once again to the podcast.
Thank you.
So, my first question is that Israel recently launched an attack on Iranian oil facilities and missile facilities. For me, it comes across as a really symbolic attack and not a substantial attack. So, do you also feel the same thing?
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying really is true. You do. A lot of people are saying it was very symbolic. I think there's a lot of symbolism, but the symbolism I think was more in the timing that the attack took place, via it being a 1 year anniversary of October 7th. Just the name of the actual operation, being the day of repentance, this correlating with the holidays that were going on in Israel. All these carry a lot of symbolism, and I think in history it's going to be interesting how all that comes out via a lot of the things that Israel's done in the past. There's almost this monumental proportion or biblical kind of proportion to it that relates to what goes on. So I think that will be seen from a historical standpoint. And I think Israel strategically picked that timing for those things, plus also having to correlate with the United States on what they were going to do. I think there was a lot of back and forth via that. But to say all that, I think it was much more than symbolic. Israel essentially took out their air defense system. And while this was reported initially via Israeli media, there hasn't been a lot of push to bring clarity to that. And I've actually started to hear a little bit more now, but they took out essentially their S-300 batteries, which were their air defense missiles that were obtained through Russia several years back, which are a little outdated, and as well as Iranians have made some of their own air defenses via using those S-300s as an example to kind of build their own. Now, from what we've heard, they weren't very successful. Israel kind of outmaneuvered them via their jets, and they were able to take out the batteries that they had. So, this being said, it's kind of leaving them right now very vulnerable. They don't have air defense, and they don't also have an air force. So if planes are going to start going overhead, or somebody wants to drop an attack at this point, they're really left exposed. And I think this is known by Khamenei and out of Tehran, and they've really pushed up the rhetoric, not only to say, oh, this was not significant, nothing happened, no big deal, because they have to do this for domestic reasons to keep face with all their proxies, everything that's going on. So I think it was much more than something that was symbolic, though it's coming out that way. I think in the days ahead, we're going to see more that it's not. And it's also going to play a big role, which we're already seeing, is whether they're going to respond or not. Iran saying, oh, I'm going to respond back. We're going to attack. They even just, I think yesterday was really strongly saying we're going to attack, all this other stuff. But the reality is, I think they know if they attack, they open the door for Israel to just come in like a flood, basically. And even the United States has kind of said, hands are off at this point. So if you retaliate, we're letting Israel just kind of do what they want. So I think it's all kind of playing into Israel's hand. And I think this is what they wanted, was they kind of put them in a very pickle situation. That all being said, Iran is really pushing for the nuclear weapon, and this seems to be all their focus. So they even announced, I think it was yesterday or the day before, via one of their advisors, that they now have the technology to make the bomb. So they've been the ability to enrich the uranium, which we've known for several years, but now they claim they have the technology to make the bomb, which is the next step, and this is what they really need. Now, whether this is...
So, sorry to interrupt. So,
Sorry.
since you brought this nuclear enrichment topic, why
Yeah.
the Israeli army did not bomb the Iranian nuclear
Yeah.
capabilities?
It's a good question. I think some of it has to do with the fact that not only U.S. pressure probably, this would be a very big strike and would uh, could drive even, I think, a bigger response. Now, whether Iran was even capable to make that response, still, it may not have been. Also, from intelligence that we do hear, Israel does not have a bomb that can reach the bunker via that's housing most of their nuclear stuff. So
Then, how did Israel eliminate the nuclear facilities of Saddam Hussein and Syria?
Saddam Hussein in Syria, I think from what I recall, it was not quite as in the same. They were able to obtain the weapons they needed, and it wasn't quite, the bunkers weren't quite in the same level that obviously the
So it
Iranians.
was not sophisticated, you are saying?
No, not as high sophisticated as what we're seeing now. So there's a new level to this, and the reality is that the United States does have the bomb, which Israel would need to acquire to be able to do this. There has been discussion, I think, several times via desire to obtain, and the United States has kind of held a little bit Israel at bay via this, I think, because they don't want an escalation of this level. You have a lot of nuclear fallout. There'll be a lot of things that will take place via this. And so there's a question of eventually if it will come to that level, but hopefully there can be some other means that can take place to kind of.
So, do you see a regime change coming in Iran?
Um, I don't forecast that there will be a regime change. I think, unfortunately, the regime is very strong via its grip on society. I mean, obviously, we know from the domestic side that we've seen, it seems that society is kind of fed up in a lot of ways with the regime. There's those that probably support the Ayatollah and his regime very strongly, but there's also a lot of resistance. I mean, we have.
It's a deeply unpopular regime.
Yes, yes, definitely. Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
But at the same time, what can be done via the domestic? We've seen uprisings in the past, but what is mounted of those? Not much. They were able to really squash them, and in many ways, in a very bad way. And so it's, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Just a minute. Just a minute.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, since you talked about the Iranian uprisings, I recently watched one of John Bolton's interview where he said that when there had been uprisings in Iran in the past, USA should have supported those uprisers and toppled the Ayatollahs. But
Mhm.
USA refused to do that, and they are paying the price now. Would you agree with this assessment?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more that the United States could possibly have done in the past to try to facilitate that kind of the uprising has gone on. It's hard to say. I think the issue you always face when you have uprisings, and then so who's going to fill this vacuum? Who's going to take the place of leadership once this leadership moves out?
It went wrong in Libya, right?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. It went wrong in Libya. I mean, look at we have, Iraq is still unfolding. There's places in the world where regime changes come via the United States' push, and you never know who you're going to get. I mean, you could get a more extreme, government. You could get more, terrorists. It's hard to say. But go ahead. Yeah.
But did not USA successfully carry out a regime change in Japan and Germany after World War II?
True, true. Japan was very much, and in Germany, yeah. I mean, those are two probably more positive examples of success of that, but you haven't seen much of that, especially in the Middle East. It
Okay.
seems like when these regime changes have come via the Middle East, it's been very different. I mean, they've tried to appoint people in the past in Iran, even with Reza Shah and like all these other,
Yeah.
yeah, and it wasn't successful. They weren't
Okay.
legitimized via the, so.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Got it. So the Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and UAE, they don't have any much greater love for Iran.
Mhm.
So are they secretly rooting for Israel in this conflict Israel in this conflict in its pursuit of destruction of Iran's proxies?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's definitely a sense that they walk the fence, obviously. And I think all of those countries might do it for different reasons, kind of. When we look at Saudi Arabia, obviously with, that the leadership that's there, they're doing a lot of domestic things. I think they want a lot of regional influence. They really want to, and Iran and them are kind of like, the two butting heads in the region for kind of some of that regional influence. Obviously, Sunni Shiite divide, you have all that going on. But the reality is, I think that, like Saudi Arabia is playing their cards in a lot of ways. I mean, they still, prior to, I think it was like October 11th, right after the attack, they had actually been in conversations with Iran for one of the first times in a long time. So
Facilitated by Chinese.
yes, yeah, exactly, by the Chinese. So, I mean, the reality is, and maybe that all crumbled via what's taken place. I think they would be happy with a degraded Iran, but I think at the same time, they're not throwing all their cards in one basket. Their relationship with Israel is growing, especially because of the economic benefit that could come out of it. But I don't think it's like clearly one way via any of those countries. So obviously Jordan has a lot of Palestinians that live in its proper. They have, because of that, they have a great population that could lean towards that. But I think the overall, the Jordanians don't want terrorism. None of these countries they're very strong on removing terrorists from their proper. And so they don't support these regimes that kind of, are carrying out that kind of extreme nature. So.
Okay, okay. So, what's your take on people when? What's your take on people suggesting a solution similar to the Good Friday Agreement that resolved the Irish troubles? Is
Mhm.
the comparison even meaningful?
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily is. I mean, every conflict, it's very difficult when it comes to conflict and conflict resolution. From my perspective, there's so much of an organic type thing via every conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is extremely unique, obviously, because you have so many layers via land, religion, when we looked at the Good Day in Ireland, it was very specific, I think, to one thing, and it was a lot more, in my opinion, manageable. Though it was extremely difficult and it doesn't quite hold the same nuances and issues that you face via the.
It's not like Northern Irish Catholics wanted the other side to get destroyed.
Exactly. So I mean, the reality is that's one extreme point that you can't get beyond some of these points that are so divisive. And when you add, religious context to it, when you add, all these other things that you can put on top of it, it's become a conflict that is very astute, and it's very difficult to kind of pin down to one issue to kind of find that resolution. There's so many layers and facets to it. So.
Okay, okay. So it's okay. Now Sinwar is dead, the main architect of October 7th attack. It's time for Israel to negotiate a peace deal. What would your response be to this?
Yeah. I think it was a great opportunity via when Sinwar actually was taken out. And I think Israel made like they reached out to try to make some type of negotiation via this happening. I would say, though, it's not the end. Unfortunately for Israel, just because Sinwar is done, the ideology is not done.
Mm.
The reality is things are still being carried out. And beyond that, there's still hostages on the ground. Until the hostages are brought home, and whether that's part of the negotiation or not, we don't see an end to this operation. So the Hamas is, if we were to today, maybe Hamas reached out and said, we're willing to negotiate, bring the hostages home. There's even been times, I think it was, yeah, right after Sinwar was taken out, Netanyahu came forward and offered to essentially, if anyone who gave up arms, he would essentially pardon them. He would, give them a way out essentially from all this, even move them maybe out of the Palestinian proper Hamas that remained, trying to like make an opening to say we can end this, get out of here, get off our border, and we'll just, this will be done. But I don't think that's the reality for Hamas, and I don't think that the ideology is so strong that most of these people are okay going down with the cause, essentially.
So is Netanyahu prolonging this war to preserve his political capital?
Yeah. I think we've heard that cry, throughout this kind of campaign, and some people, pro and con via Netanyahu have felt that way. I don't think overall that's his mindset. I mean, is that what it's doing? Probably very much so. He's kind of was in the place for this, and there's been a lot of taking responsibility, saying, "Oh, should he be responsible for this? Is his fault?" And there's been times where he's owned up to that a little bit. Some people have felt he has not owned up enough to it. Um, how history is going to look at that's going to be interesting, but the reality is I don't think he's prolonging it essentially to try to hold some political office. I mean, the time is going to come when this kind of, comes down, and I think then we'll see an Israeli election. And we'll move on.
Okay. So President Biden has been a vocal supporter of Israel for his entire life. He has multiple times said that he is a Zionist himself. But since the October 7th attack, he has largely bowed down to the pressure from the far left in the Democratic Party. That far left Democratic Party is really plagued with anti-Semitism. Despite that, lot of Jewish Americans are going to pull the lever for Harris in this upcoming election. How do you explain this?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. And I think the reality is, um, obviously, I think Biden's stature on all this has really come down to a lot of being that it was an election year, the politics that were going on, trying to kind of walk a double line via, he would say a lot of this rhetoric, and then you would see the United States give a lot of money or weapons via Israel, and even his, the kind of far left side would criticize some of this, saying like, you're saying this, but then you're going and giving, more aid, more money, you're helping. So he's kind of tried to walk that line, I think, more for political reasons. When it comes to the vote, that's a great question, and that's something I think a lot of people have looked at for years and years. I think this year you're going to see more Republican support than you've ever seen. That being said, um, obviously the Jewish community is not monolithic. You've got a lot of different. You have the religious, you have the non-religious. The secular tend to vote Democrat, and why that is, whether it's just the values and principles that the Democratic Party speaks to them more. I've had professors in the past kind of hint at the idea, which I think is a little bit too complicated, but maybe this is the way it is that Republicans have a Judeo-Christian value anyways. They're going to support Israel. So if you vote Democrat, then you have a little bit more pull via the Democratic Party. So you kind of get both parties, you know what I mean? So you can kind of manipulate a little bit more. Whether that's really going through the mind of people or not, I don't think it's necessarily, but I think it comes down to values and principles. Some people are very critical of Netanyahu, of Israel, some of their stuff they're doing, even the seculars. I mean, we've seen Jewish people come out and condemning, some of this stuff. But I think when you boil it down, it's a little confusing to me myself. I think it's pretty clear when we look at policy who's, supporting more. Unfortunately, I think the Democratic Party has failed a lot in regards to Israel, in the sense of, even in the past, trying to take a different stance with Iran via more diplomatic. But in doing this, they've let a lot of funding, a lot of money go through the channels, and kind of this swapping between Democrat and.
That's what I could not understand. After
Mhm.
assuming the office in 2021, why did the Biden administration go begging to Iran for signing a deal?
Yeah, yeah. This is hard for me to understand as well. I mean, the reality is, like I said, I don't really get. I think, again, from taking the perspective of what I've heard them say, they're trying to build trust. They're trying to go through diplomatic channels. They wanted to go back to the IAEU to be able to, like, I mean, IEA. Did I say that right? IAEA, like the whole regulatory system of the nuclear weapons. They want to get back into inspections. They want to get back on Iranian soil to be able to go that process. But I don't believe that was successful in the past. I mean, they still were enriching in secret areas. They were, so I can't really say I completely understand it myself, but I think that it was a little bit of a failure, and I think that we're seeing that
I
via.
think it was a huge failure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So again, the Western leaders have started to bring back the two-state solution back into the political discourse. The
Mhm.
Palestinians have multiple times expressed their desire to reject this two-state solution. But why the leaders in the West are still obsessed about this two-state solution?
Yeah. I actually think I did write something about this in the past, and to me, I've been extremely frustrated with this whole two-state solution, two-state solution. I think the reality is we're not at a two-state solution anymore. This is the only political framework that we have, via especially from a political standpoint. When you're standing up and saying something, they grab onto this two-state solution, but this is much more complicated than that. We don't have two states. We have the PLO in the West Bank, and we have Hamas, who's run, the Gaza Strip. Now Hamas is on its way out, but who's going to essentially be that one state? Are we going to make the PLO take over the Gaza Strip and West Bank? But then you got to figure out, how do you connect the two territories? How do you make one cohesive state? So there's all these logistics, and there's all these things that aren't being really looked at. There's just this form of words being thrown around, two-state solution, when I think it's a lot more complicated than that. And the reality is, even if you want to make a two-state, we have to address the ideology that exists right now. So this is much more than if you prop up another leadership in this territory and we're not addressing the ideological problem that we have, you're going to have the indoctrination just keep going. And in reality, you're going to wind up either in a similar place or with a very weak government that's eventually going to get toppled. So I think we need to go back to the drawing board, and we need to kind of stop using this rhetoric of a two-state solution as a simple fix to kind of
I feel that they are using this two-state rhetoric, two-state solution rhetoric to appease the local Arab population.
No, and I think you're very right. And like I said, I think it's an easy way to differentiate your stance. It's an easy way to kind of encapsulate the whole conflict when, and like you're saying, it's probably is very true via the politics that we're going through right now, the election that we're heading into. This language is familiar. And if you say, hey, I support a two-state solution, then you do earn some votes via those people that might be, whether it be on college campuses or whatever you're looking to aim towards. So.
Okay, okay. So, since you brought the college campuses, please pardon my profanity in advance. What the fuck is happening in American universities? What is going on there?
This
Students rallying around Hamas flags and shouting anti-American and anti-Israeli slogans? What's
yeah,
happening there? How did America get here?
this is a great question. And the reality is, I don't think it's logical in any sense. But to kind of try to address it, and being that, many years of myself being on universities, there is a culture in universities that tries to lean towards, and I say tries because I don't even like this, liberal definition of like the left party, because I think liberty is something that goes across the board. But the college campuses, the academia has really tried to push this free spirited, liberal, leftist kind of policy via campus. That being said, this seems even crazy for that, you know what I mean? But the reality is, I think that is where we find ourselves. And the sad part about it is we see that this idea of social justice, these young people think we're standing up for social justice issues, and they're even grouping stuff for, Black Lives Matter or, gays or this type of thing all into the category. And then with Israel, and some of this is so contradictory to one another, but it's been just it's like set in their minds that these are all social justice issues and that they all kind of correlate to one another. Beyond that, looking at social media, people are getting misinformation constantly. And this is part of the game. Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, they love to give misinformation. So if you're not getting educated, you are at a university trying to be educated, but if you're not really diving into what's going on, because many interviews I've seen, many discussions I've seen, they don't really know what they're talking about. They don't really understand the conflict, and they're just taking a side based on saying, oh, the Palestinians are these poor people that are getting, massacred or whatever they're seeing via social media. And this is kind of perpetuating this idea. But it is very crazy and kind of sad to me because you would have a higher expectation for people who are getting an education via college university and their ability to vet and to kind of dig into what's really going on would be extremely important. And I kind of blame the administration as well. We saw a lot of, heads of the universities stepping down, who carried these views and stance, that were,
Depends on the context.
yeah. So
It
it's
blew my mind.
it really is. And but beyond that, there's many professors that do the same. So the reality is, I think there needs to be kind of a recalculation of our university's culture via those people that are presenting. I would hope for people that are teaching and many good professors that I've had in the past really didn't give me their stance on things, but rather gave me the facts, gave me the history, and you kind of decipher through and understand what's going on via those points rather than really preaching your own agenda via. And I think that's happening too much in our college universities. The young people are being a little bit brainwashed via their professors and the leadership there to believe a doctrine that is very false. So
Okay, okay. Do you have kids?
I do young though, so they're
In,
not ready for college university.
in future, would you send them to Harvard and Yale?
Oh man, at this point, no. We'll have to see what happens via, the changes between now and then. But I know people who are, Jewish who are leaving the United States via a non-desire to send their kids to university with all the anti-Semitism what's going on. So
It looks like, we are back to early 1930s.
it is, and it's kind of hard to believe via you think of all the progressions we've done, how and where we're at with technology and all this other stuff, how we could be in this place. But I think that like I said, the disinformation campaigns that are out there, and I know a lot of people that are doing a lot to try to educate on what's going on with Israel to, be activists via that because there's a huge need because there's just so much information that you have to make sure you're getting the stuff that's accurate. And to be honest, you're best probably doing some more historical context, trying to understand what's going on via the conflict rather than just looking at the current events and what's taking place. So.
Okay, okay. And what's the plan in Gaza should be after this war? Should Israel be involved in the security situation, or should some kind of Arab policing structure be established there?
Yeah. I think there needs to be a combination of both. I think that you're going to have to have Israel involved. Obviously, Israel's very good at security. We know that. I mean, they've gone through quite a bit themselves. And the reality is, but I believe they really want those Arab counterparts involved to create legitimacy. And Israel, if their true desire is to exit out completely, they have to have someone who's going to kind of facilitate that. And you're going to have to find, I think the bigger question is who's that going to be? Who's legitimate enough? Who can stand in that place? And that's, I think, the biggest dilemma because even some of the Arab countries, uh, many of them in the past have not wanted to participate in this. I mean, there's been attempts previously to kind of assimilate Gaza into the Sinai Peninsula to, the Jordanians really don't want more Palestinians crossing their border from the West Bank. So there's all this kind of no one really wants to take the Palestinians and assimilate them. And even if there's not going to be an assimilation, there's going to be a country unto its own. Like you said, okay, so who's going to really facilitate this? I think it's going to be a combination initially to get everything going, and hopefully there can be a progression where Israel can kind of just step away because there's really going to need to be a lot of security. They're going to need to make sure that the terrorists don't just come back that just were taken out, so there's going to need to be a combination of efforts via Western powers, Arab countries, Israel itself. So
Okay, okay, got it. So Moving forward, this Arab coalition in the democratic base is going to expand, and this is going to lead the democratic leaders to adopt a confrontational policy towards Israel in the future. How
Mhm.
should Israel handle this potential future scenario?
Yeah. I think for Israel itself, I mean, unfortunately, we do see this, and it's very accurate. And we saw this, this is going on in Europe too, especially in England and places like that, where it's even more further along than we are in the United States. But this is kind of a little bit of the policy, I think, of some of these groups is kind of to infiltrate the political systems, to, kind of use Western democratic values against us. That being said, what your question was is, yeah, I think that Israel's going to just have to just be mindful of all of it. They're going to have to make sure they're diversified. I mean, you can't ever put all your eggs in one basket, and I don't think Israel ever does that. Obviously, the United States is a great partner of theirs. They turn towards them to support, but at the end of the day, we've seen Israel will act alone if Israel feels it needs, and that's something that they're very strong on. Is like, we want to work with our partners, but at the end of the day, we're going to protect our interests no matter what. And to me, that makes sure that you have a diversification of people that you are connected with via economically, militarily, all those things. And they are. I mean, look at the relationships with Saudi Arabia, with Jordan, with, those things are even developing. And I think those only benefit Israel. Israel has relationships with China. Yeah, China's done a lot of things where you go, gosh, how can you even, well, that doors, or Russia. Look at what happened with Russia. And, so they've been helping, facilitate, what goes on, but they still keep those channels loosely open. And I think that's just strategic via not being like, okay, the US is forever going to support us and we just can rely on that. So.
Oh, okay, okay, got it. So, how do you assess the? I mean, what's your take on the Jewish diaspora in America? Are they really united in their support for Israel? I've heard a lot of skeptical voices within the Jewish community. How do you engage with them?
Yeah. Um, I think overall they're extremely united. Like I had said before on like the vote, obviously it's not one thing or the other. All the Jewish community is not exactly the same. You have a lot of varying degrees of religious values, just practices, all those things. Now
It's
I
a
know,
wide spectrum.
yeah, it's a wide spectrum, definitely. I know that obviously the more religious you get, via like modern orthodoxy, extremely supportive. My son goes to a school, they're extremely supportive of Israel and what's going on. Now, you do have those voices that are out there, and those tend to be publicized and loud, the ones that are very, critical of Israel or speaking out, because like I said, some people like to highlight those voices via, because, oh, they're Jewish and they hate Israel, and and that's the reality, is that there are those people out there that are very critical and don't support. Um, Again, it's all very, if you looked at where they come from, what do they practice? Do they even identify as Jewish? You know what I mean? Like all those things. And some people identify Jewish just because of the culture, just because you have the blood.
Bernie Sanders is a Jewish.
There you go. Yeah. Bernie Sanders is a great example of that. Yeah. And he's extremely critical to the point of, you would say, is he anti Semite? You know what I mean? Like, it walks that line. And, the reality is, just because you say you're Jewish or you have Jewish blood doesn't mean you support Israel, and doesn't mean that you agree with their policies and, or what you believe or what your education is on it. So, it's yeah, it's tough situation, and you can't just expect every Jewish person is gonna go with Israel. So
Sorry?
you can't expect that every Jewish person is supporting Israel essentially. So
Okay, okay, okay. So the Hamas have not shied away from admitting the act that they perpetrated on October the 7th. Yahya Sinwar openly said that they did that and they will do it again and again. But
mhm.
there are some groups in the international community who deny that October 7th ever happened.
Yeah.
How do you remedy this dark ignorance?
Yeah. I think it's going to be hard to remedy it. Obviously, you can continue to present evidence. Israel's presented tons of evidence throughout.
Hamas themselves have presented the evidence.
Exactly. Like you said, they documented it themselves. But you have people that say the Holocaust didn't exist. You know what I mean? So the reality is people are going to believe what they want to believe. They're going to paint kind of their own ideas because they want to discredit something, you know? So they can say that's what they believe. Obviously, it's not the facts. We know what the facts are. We know what's out there. We know the documentation. You kind of have to just move beyond these people. You continue to say, hey, this is what is, this is what's out there, but you can't, like they say, the saying is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can't make someone change their doctrine. And especially if their doctrine is something that maybe is self-serving, or maybe they have their own agenda, who knows why they're kind of buying into this, but it seems harder to believe that it doesn't exist than just to believe the truth, so it's kind of crazy.
Okay. So by bombing Gaza and killing civilians, Israel is only going to embolden the hostile ideology among the Palestinians.
Mhm.
So Israel is approaching this crisis in a crisis based on a misplaced assumption. What would your response be to this?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, it does unfortunately only embolden it, but the reality is, I think we're in a place already where, like I was saying before, the ideology and doctrinal change needs to happen. And for that to happen, there has to be a regime change. We need to have kind of a start over with Gaza. It's not going to, if they weren't bombing them, I don't think it would change the fact that, yes, like you said, it does legitimize, and I can't say I wouldn't be in the same position if you lost a sibling or a father or a mother via a bombing or an attack from Israel. You would perpetuate everything that they're saying, but there really needs to be a response to this via the disarmament of Hamas. They need to get in there and they need to start to try to educate. Does this retribute for what happened? No, and it makes it a very hard situation to kind of, I mean, could there have been diplomatic means that went through this process to disarm it? There's been attempts, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like a catch 22. It's like, well, if we don't attack, then we just leave this going. If we do attack, we legitimize what people are saying about us. So you're kind of wrong either way, kind of a thing. So I think the reality is you got to do something to try to end the cycle.
Okay. I'm really curious to ask this. Why did when Arafat walked away from the two-state solution, why there was zero opposition from international community and the Western leaders?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good question. One of the main sticking points was the refugees, and that negotiation. But I really believe that the Western countries knew that Arafat kind of met his end. He did a lot of concessions essentially, and for him to come to the place, it would be essentially ending what he worked for. The PLO, the idea of the refugees coming back. This is kind of the foundation of the organization and the resistance. So to say, oh, I will accept all this, the two-state solution, I think it was going too far for him. I think that he made a lot of concessions via and this is just looking in hindsight, you know what I mean, obviously, what's going on, but to say what was the kind of the temperature of the Palestinians at that point, he got a lot of slack via even what he did. I think that it would only been more, anger, more aggression towards him via him trying to make more, what would have been seen as more concessions to bring this about.
Okay, so you are saying Arafat was worried about his own political position?
I believe so. Yeah, extremely, extremely much more. I mean, because he already was kind of opposing. There was mixed emotions, but he was opposing a lot of his support, as well as, when we look at all of his stance prior to that, he made a lot of changes towards the end of his time to become a lot more diplomatic, and he changed the nature of the PLO. But at the same time, I think if he went too far, he would be almost just ending the resistance. You know what I mean? It would be seen as a wash up or a cop out for the Palestinian. One of the sticking points, like I said, the refugees. This has to be perpetuated. This has to keep going because if you don't continue to have a claim to the land, then what? How are you gonna, keep people moving the direction you want doing or attacking Israel or you know what I mean? So you have to have something that legitimizes your cause. And I think if he would have made too many concessions, he would lose his legitimacy, he'd lose his support, and maybe even not have been able to lead anymore. So,
And forget about the war in the I mean, forget about the war that is going on in the land and the air. Why Israel is losing the PR war to Hamas and Palestinians?
mhm. That's a good question. I can't really say I know exactly. I think, obviously, like I said, there's a lot of people out there that are doing a lot to try to publicize via the, PR and so forth. I think there's so much misinformation, like we said. Um, I think because this conflict has gone on for so long, the interesting thing to me is when I initially went to Israel, it was interesting to me to see how everyone had their opinion via what is going on with the conflict in Israel. And it's like a topic that not everyone was really educated on, but people have opinions. I think it's one of those things in the world where everyone's seen it for so long. They have their opinion, they have their viewpoint on it. And I think that this is kind of perpetuated that. So if that answers that.
Okay, okay. So from November to January, in US political parlance, it is called as lame duck presidency.
Mm-hmm.
So will Israel come under major threat from Iran and Hezbollah during this period?
Will Israel, you said, conduct like another?
No, no.
I'm sorry.
Would Israel come under major threat from Iran and
Oh, okay.
Hezbollah during
Yeah,
this
yeah,
period?
yeah. Yeah, that's a great question too. I really don't think at this point. I think obviously we're going to see the consistent escalation that we've seen from Hezbollah itself. There's a lot of people already analyzing via Iran's response. Iran has said they will have a response. Would this be a good window to do it? Some of it might come from us seeing who actually is going to be taking office. I think will make a difference via Iran's decision to respond or not. That being said, too, like I said previously, I think Iran's very vulnerable right now, even though they don't want to present themselves as being vulnerable. So that it's kind of in their court. And if they're to carry out a strike on Israel during this period, I think Israel has a real big green light to do whatever they would like in response. And I think that they kind of know that. And I think there's some a little bit of fear via the regime, whether it wants to admit it or not, that this could take place. And like I said, I think the biggest issue is who's going to take office. If they see, whether they're going to be not able to do as much as they want via maybe depending on who takes in, then it could change their approach possibly.
Okay. Starting from Bill Clinton, why does every American president seem to hate Bibi?
That's another interesting question. I can't really say. I can't really say completely. I mean, I can't say, but I don't know what Trump's stance was when he was in office, or even George W. Bush, or like some
No,
of the.
no. If you read Jared Kushner's memoir,
Okay,
you will know that Trump was not a big fan of Bibi.
really,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. I never heard that before, but yeah, I mean, the reality is then maybe it's just a personality thing. Maybe they don't like his approach to things. I don't know. I don't think I can really comment completely on that. That's interesting to hear, but
Mm,
I would have to assume maybe it's just the way he handles himself. Maybe that he doesn't, I don't know if he's an easy guy to work with or whether he's very strong. He's been leading for a long time, so maybe he's stuck in his ways in a lot of way, and maybe that makes them not comfortable to really talk with him or to deal with him via his
okay,
position.
okay. And how do you see the end game in Middle East right now?
Hmm. End game meaning like what would be the end game in your mind, like kind of thing via.
Like what? I mean, is it would it be a World War II style of? I
Okay.
mean,
Yeah. more like a Cold War, World War II. How do you think?
No. Do you think Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran will be completely decapitated and the new Middle Eastern order will be birthed, or the status quo will be prevailed?
Got it. I think that there's a degradation obviously already what we're seeing of Hezbollah. Hamas, I think, will be eliminated. Iran, I think we're going to see more of a status quo. I think that there's going to be definitely a degradation of their abilities and powers. I think our biggest concern at this point is just the world, I think, needs to wake up to where the Iranians are via their nuclear power. This is going to be, and their nuclear weapons. I think this is going to be the big thing that's going to need to be addressed. It's kind of been out there for a long time, but they get a nuclear bomb, we're going to see a different kind of world order via them kind of utilizing this to manipulate countries. So.
This might be a controversial question.
Mhm.
Is Israel finished if Iran acquires a nuclear weapon?
That's a good question. I personally don't believe so. I think that the question will be is obviously what will be the capability of this weapon and the ability to obviously we know there's the process of making the weapon, the process of learning how to actually launch the weapon, but how far they can launch it, like all these things will take time to work out. I think if there's writing on the wall, and I think Israel's very aware of what's going on in their process, I think if it gets too close, there's going to definitely be an Israeli response at some point because I don't think they can really. And they've been crying this for, almost decades. Yeah, you probably could go back to Netanyahu UN speeches where every time he's holding something up via, we can't let them get a nuclear bomb. We can't, you know what I mean? And so this has been going on and on. I think it's going to require, we're getting to a point where it's going to require a response very soon. Um, and then the question is how far along really are they? Are they being legitimate about what they're saying in public? We don't know whether their rhetoric is truthful or not. Um, their other military technologies are very behind and low graded, and so we know there's been a lot of focus on this nuclear side of things. But is it? And Israel's done many things in the past to kind of slow the process down, whether it be scientists being taken out, whether it be, you know, all these different little more small things to kind of prolong the process. But yeah, eventually it's going to have to be addressed. I don't think if they acquire it that it's going to be instantaneously, oh, Israel's done. I think they're going to use it as a threatening tool. Obviously, there's a lot of countries that will, I believe, at this point, come to Israel's response to kind of say, if you use this, we're going to respond. And so it'll become this tit for tat, Cold War kind of, nobody's going to drop the bomb or else. It's kind of just a stature thing. It's like if I can hold this bomb, then I can tell people what to do, kind of thing, and they want this power to wield the threat, basically. So whether they're going to carry it out or not, it would be a suicide mission, essentially. But
Okay. So Israel has degraded Hamas capabilities. Israel has decapitated Hezbollah. Why Israel did not do this in 2014 and 2019 when it was attacked by the same enemies?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And I think in retrospect, they may have questioned that themselves. I mean, there's probably people that have said they should have did that at that point. Um, I think the hostages really is what drove this. I mean, obviously the extreme nature of this attack hasn't been seen. The the actual fact that, I mean, we've had hostages in the past, but not this many at one time. I mean, the atrocity of October 7th, I think, really drove a response that was of this level. I think it was an equal response to what took place. I don't think that in the past, and maybe they felt that they would have more support via the world international community by saying this is the extreme nature. And like I said, I think they had to respond in this way. I don't think in the past they felt that it was necessary to go to this level, and maybe that's a lack of intelligence, maybe that's a lack of understanding of what they were actually after. And obviously we've seen even in the north, they found tons, more tunnels via the same type of attack that they were considering taking out, having carried forward via Hezbollah. And some people have questioned whether Hamas kind of jumped the gun and kind of ruined their plan, because now Israel's kind of debunking all that stuff, and it's kind of working in their favors.
Okay, okay, okay. So during the 1960s and the 70s, Israel was the underdog, and there was this huge support for Israel in America. Now the position is reversed. How did this change occur?
You say again, you said so the support was for
No,
Israel in
during the
America?
60s and the
Yeah,
70s,
yeah,
during the Yom Kippur War and the
right.
Six-Day
There's a
War,
lot of
there was
support.
this huge support for Israel among the American public.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now Israel was considered the underdog, but
Gotcha.
now the position has reversed. How did this change occur?
Yeah. I think it's progressive. I think not only can we look at the ideological standpoint in the United States has changed, we can also look at Israel's gotten a lot stronger. I think just the perception of their strength, their ability in the Middle East. I think because they're seen as being this, strong country that, and the picture of the Palestinians is this weak, you know what I mean? So
So the oppressed angle comes in here.
exactly. Yeah. So this kind of picture has kind of brought us to that place and kind of changed the view of people in general. But I think also, like we've seen on college campuses, obviously the younger generation and their mindset of social justice and what's going on in the world is kind of twisted. So I think this can play a role into like
How do you explain this LGBTQ support for Palestinians? Are they really serious?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And I've seen many people say, well, go there. If you think you support, why don't you go to Gaza and see what happens?
You'll be shot on the spot.
You will, definitely, definitely. In Iran as well. I mean, we just saw there's a protest from a woman that was abused who I think is protesting in Iran, and it's very oppressive, very dangerous, and they don't love Western values, and that's the crazy part, is that they really hate the idea of democracy and the culture in the West, and yet these people are saying, oh, free them, and but they're not really understanding what's going on. So
Okay. So now the far right and the Israeli politics have started to have started to demand for a settlement in Gaza. Do you think this will tarnish the image of Israel on the global stage?
for not being willing to kind of negotiate that or come to that is what you're saying.
No, creating a settlement similar to the West Bank
Uh-huh.
again in Gaza.
Oh, okay, I see. But we were saying it'll tarnish them via not doing it, or what do you mean? Maybe.
No, no, no. I'm saying that. So again, they want to go. I mean, the far right in the Israeli politics want the Israeli military to go deep into the Gaza and
Right,
again occupy and establish settlements in the Gaza, just like
right.
it has established in West Bank. So,
Yes.
do you really think this will be go this will help
Yeah.
Israel?
No. Definitely not. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest fears, I think, of a lot of Western countries, a lot of like outsiders, and via even those that are in Israel that don't stand for this type of thing. I would hope Netanyahu's not going to yield to this. Obviously, he's become more far right over the years as his policies have kind of drifted there via population and votes. And you could look at Israeli elections and all that's going on there. And you could argue, why he's carrying those points. But at the same time, I don't think that that's legitimately going to happen. I don't think he's going to let that happen. And I don't think that that would suit anyone or really, you know, be a resolve to this situation. Probably just make more conflict. And in the end, would just give more reason to whether at this point Gaza would be disarmed and not able to do anything in the future, it would just legitimize again more of the anger.
Okay. Okay. And youngsters these days, especially the college goers, they don't even know the term called Holocaust. They have no idea about the various pogroms that have been carried out against the Jewish people. So, what kind of measures can be adopted to educate and enlighten these misguided youths?
Yeah. I think definitely the one of the big things would be is just education via trying to teach the history, showing them, documentation. Obviously, I know there's not many Holocaust survivors left, and there's been a large push. There's a lot of organizations that do a lot to document them via saying that we need to debunk this kind of mentality that it didn't exist, that it didn't, we need to have firsthand accounts of what has taken place. Um, I think just education, educating them, trying to give them the information to show them. Obviously, like I said before, unfortunately, if somebody really doesn't want to believe something, they may never come to that place where they recognize it. I mean, that's kind of in anything that we have in the world, but we can do our best to continue to say, hey, this is what happened. This is the truth. You know, look at the history, all these type of things. So.
Okay, okay. And should Israel consider installing Palestinian Authority in Gaza as a part of governance?
Palestinian 40 part of it. Yeah. I think it's definitely an option. At this point, I don't feel like there's enough strength via the leadership there, so I don't know whether it would be legitimate enough to kind of carry that out. Israel could kind of prop up and try to keep that support, but I think honestly, I don't really know personally who's going to come out of the woodwork via leadership. And then maybe it's going to be, like we said, a coalition more or less of Arab countries and so forth that will be that. I don't think there's enough strength via the PLO or Palestinian, to kind of lead that. It's been interesting that, we haven't heard a whole lot via their leadership discussing anything that's really going on. They've been quiet in a lot of ways. There's been moments where there's been comments and so forth, but overall, I think it's going to take a brand new kind of government to start over on this.
Okay, okay, okay. So thank you so much, Neil, for your time, and I really learned a lot, and thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Oh, I appreciate it.
We
Great
had a
question.
great time discussing with you. Yeah.
Too. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'll have
Okay.
to.
And yeah, I just wanted to ask you one question, which I would have asked you if I had known this previously. I can just include this. You're okay to take one question?
Sure. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
Okay. What it means to be a American Jew? I mean, what it means to be a Jew today in America?
Yeah. I think it's an interesting place right now. Obviously, I mean, I think there's a lot of pride in a lot of way too. I mean, even with the stuff that's going on, you still um, are you have to kind of rise up a little bit more into what you believe via the stuff that's flying around via anti-Semitism or whatever's going on. There's still a pride for it. Obviously, there's also a caution. You do feel a little bit like, gosh, if I'm out in the streets, if I'm wearing a kippah, if I'm, like these things, like how are people going to respond to me? Um, you kind of looking over your shoulder sometimes, and it depends on where you're at and what you're facing. But you do just, there's this air that not everyone is peaceful. Not everyone loves the Jewish people. We know that. And so it's complicated, but at the same time, um, there's kind of a mixed emotions. Like I said, I feel like from the community I know where I'm at, very prideful, very supportive of Israel, trying to stand up for what you believe in, but on the same time, kind of being like, that there's just a lot of hatred out there. Is this going to get even more? And why does this even exist is always a question. You're just like, why? Like this, we're people, everyone's people. Like, why are we fighting over these issues?
There are two strains of anti-Semitism. One is from the far left, and another is from the far right. How do you devise a solution to combat these two different strains of anti-Semitism?
Yeah. Um, I think it's probably going to be, I mean, I think overall education is going to be one of the biggest. Obviously, we know even the far right version of it, there's kind of like, oh, a lot of them are saying the Holocaust didn't exist, and there's this kind of, I don't know, more the KK kind of mentality and the hatred for, and then the far did I say right or left? Because I'm getting again, the far right is kind of like, or far left is like the ones that are saying, oh, we stand for the Palestinians, free rights, all this. So they're a little different in a lot of ways via the spectrum of why they're Semitic. But the reality is, I think that again, it's going to all come down to a recognition, an education. But again, if you hold these values and social principles and you just hate people, sometimes it's hard to address no matter what. If I say to you, oh, these are the facts, and you say, I don't want to look at the facts, I want to look at these facts, then, and that's kind of the world we live in, is the information that we have out there. You can create your own narrative, and that can be scary in a lot of ways.
Thank you. Thank you. I just plugged in two questions. I just wanted to ask you this. So
Yeah, yeah.
you seem to know a lot. I'm just curious to keep asking you this. So that's yeah.
No,
So